Well, real risk of that with it affecting oil and stuff, which is there. And the growing warmth, the beauty outside. And we remember those who are going through more difficult circumstances, particularly those in war-torn places. The soldiers, that they may be merciful to the degree they can, uh, and most especially that the conflict doesn't spread and draw more people into the violence. Let it be in Jesus' name. Amen. The book of James, depending again, like I said, there's so many commentaries have the first verses, almost all the major themes you're going to see through. They're on a special day today at the co-op. There's a big murder mystery presentation. The forensics class is walking. They're going to do a mock crime and then show people how they would. All right. Tribes in the dispersion. Testing of your faith produces steadfastness, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask for his ways. We'll stop there. Now, one of the disadvantages, I mentioned how the book of James is a lot like the book of Proverbs. You could almost do it, but when you have completely different verses, and if there's less of, say there's no argument, feel free to lift up any verse. Yes. Mm-hmm. Doubts. We just don't quite understand things. Yeah. No, I'm really, again, and again, he's doing this in constantly changing. So you look out at the sea and the top of the waves is always moving and shifting and changing. There's nothing solid there, right? He's not talking about, when we talk about been a kind of persistent assault or the material, what is not the opposite of the spiritual. There's only the spirit. He's not talking about the kind of doubts where it comes pointedly. No one would prison going, are you the one? Moment. Trying to figure out here is the deep commitment. And he uses this image of a wave. If you're in a boat? The keel if you're moving. What if you're not moving? What keeps you from drifting all over? Contrast, you remember, event, a fair number of the so you have this sort of this idea. Do I ever disease? And I'm doubting why God is 8:00 Sunday night because I was running around. This person ends we had to bring about. James is talking about the fundamental commitment. Who's basically one person trying to serve two masters. I'm playing the game of person trying to serve two masters. I'm playing the game of I'm in, I'm out, I'm in about that when I'm in, I'm out, I'm in about that when it comes to money and God. Right? This is what James is pointing at when it comes to money and God. Right? This is what James is pointing at. Occurred to me in my 20s, I never would have thought I'm facing life and your goes on. That would have thought I'm facing life and your goes on. That bishop mostly of like a Jewish church, unfaith. And here we run into some of in English to us. Okay, also equals faithfulness. Almost impossible for somebody thinking in Greek or Hebrew, for that matter, to think of faith apart from faithfulness. To think of faith are not required to follow. It does mean in there. Now the fundamental question, not the law anymore. Kingdom that's in Iran end time stuff. The story you probably know it better than I do. Come back till we're in the last battle. I say end times. Come back till we're in the last battle. Say end times, it's the coming of God's kingdom. We call it Messiah, and that's happening right now. Where is it happening? It's happening in the life of those who believe. It's happening in what we would call the church. Those who assemble, and that's what the word church means. They no longer gather around. But what distinguishes today? I go to the words of Jesus. Fundamental difference to be this distinction, and you're going to see talking about the law works anymore because we've got Jesus, who is the once and for all sacrifice. So I no longer need to offer sacrifices to get clean. Distinction's starting to happen, but teams need to address the issue. Okay, they're not really supposed to be split. The faithfulness piece just simply means no longer to the prescriptions of Torah. They're getting these Gentiles. We have to let the Gentiles in. God gave them the message. Okay, here's the things they in the Torah, and they requirements, or they don't need. You don't need them. Requirements, right? Committed adultery with change. Done. Because the reason I broke all this down under faith and faithfulness, not only because James is going to get to it later, but because in Greek, To make a word opposite, you add a letter to the beginning. The letter is A. Faithfulness, we translate as sin as an archery term. It literally meant missing the mark. So you're aiming and you miss. Okay? Anyone who's done archery knows that that's mostly what you do. Most of the time, you just try to miss, right? You try to be more consistent. But when it applies to fall into mixed, James is speaking again. 19 rather, I think I'm getting wrong. Problem. You know how this word is usually translated? Which is a complete bump in the road is not what he's talking about. He's talking about mixed allegiance. Jews are not allowed. This is why even the Gentile Christians are for sacrifice. So because that is a bad witness. Here you have this, and because that looks like unfaith. Am I worship? I'm using your God. That's what worship is. Okay, and you have. This is what James is speaking about. Mixed allegiances. You don't want to have that. And it'll get amplified as we go on here. You'll see a little bit more what translation does anybody have something besides double-minded man? What do you have? No. So I got my Greek New Testament here. Yep. We translated as it's not double-minded. Serve two gods. Translated as double-minded. And I have more than the mind that's split here. It's more than doubt, and it doesn't work. Okay. I shouldn't interrupt.
I'm always off the wall. Is this apologetics where we're kind of defending the faith against the physicist and the mathematician and so forth?
No, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, it's definitely not that, because that is written to believers. He's writing to people who are by lots of Jewish things to remind them. It's the water with those who don't share them. So in its integral currents and religious ideas, false. You kind of either, if you're really into it, you're part of the mystic. If you're really into it, you're part of the mystic. Let's say that because there's a lot of bad stories. Pay off all the gods a little bit. A lot of bad stories. Pay off all the gods a little bit. It's really dangerous. And you see before, it's really dangerous. And you see before, there's this wonderful story where God, that sounds very pious. There's a first clue. God, that sounds very pious. There's a first clue. But it's because he already has a plan. To worship the gods of the Assyrians because they think they're off to worship the gods of the Assyrians because they think they're offering a better deal. That and offering a better deal. That and I'll offer some prayers over here to Asherah. But it's a good question. I'll offer some prayers over here to Asherah. But it's a good question. Thank you. Yeah, that's against that way of thinking as they thank you. Yeah, that's against that way of thinking as they go out. Go out. Verse 5. You see this introduction, a good amount of the Old Testament, called the Deuterocanonical books or the apocryphal books. That version of the Old Testament, That version of the Old Testament. And when they do, even if they were translates the Hebrew this way and Paul translates it that way, we don't see that. We see them quoting the Greek version of the Old Testament, which was the only other version besides the Hebrew that was authorized to be read in synagogue. Version of the Old Testament, which was the only other version besides the Hebrew that was authorized to be read in synagogue. With it as modern people. What we're going to do here, is a little bit incomplete. We tend to, but it's not complete. But it's not complete. Wisdom is like, if you want to call it, almost like a guardian angel, which is why Christians associated Jesus with wisdom. He is regularly Jesus with wisdom. He is regularly called the wisdom of God. So they can look at it too. So I'm just going to start reading right at the beginning. Wisdom has built her house, set her table. Since she says, Come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. He says, come, eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live and walk in the way of ins. Even just based on what I just said. Yes, based on what I just said. Yes, invitational first. Invitational first of all. She's coming into banquet image, right? Everybody. She's coming into banquet image, right? Everybody. That pagan worship involves the Acropolis is the size it is. Pagan worship involves the Acropolis is the size it is. You had this big banquet. You had this big banquet with the pillars. I mean, this is turn in here. Whoever lacks with the pillars. I mean, this is turn in here. Whoever lacks sense. So here, and what's out there is a scarcity of is sin. Wisdom here, and what's out there is a scarcity of is sin. Wisdom here is and I think as exploring and finding things. Yes, there were new quests and things like this, but when you found the thing, what was important was to align yourself with it correctly. What's important was to align yourself with it correctly. It's not just having knowledge that explicitly Enlightenment cosmology gives up, which is in your fancy word for the day with Pastor Brett, James. It's the word perfect. Okay? Perfect or complete. Wisdom means not just knowing a thing, but using it in the way for which it was intended. Using it in the way for which it was intended. And anything any way we want. Sin, in a certain way, was using things the wrong way. Using good things, because God created the world good, right? Using them in the wrong way. You're out of alignment. So we're going to, as chapter 9 goes on in the word, how bad the poverty is, right? Or how bad the hunger is. Verse 7, whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse. He who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man and he will be wiser still. Teach a righteous man his insight. So you get this quick contrast between the foolish, who when they're corrected are rage about it, and the wise one who goes, oh, thanks for telling me I didn't know. Right? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, though. So this is, she's inviting people into this banquet. The banquet starts with honoring the true God. That's what fear of the Lord is. And knowledge of the Holy One is insight. Okay? So this goes back to that double-mindedness, that double-souledness. You want to be singularly focused from will be added to your life. So there's this invitation in to become full, who basically is compared to a seductress or paying for it as you go. Wisdom and folly. One is true love, and one is. Now we're going to go back to James because we're very much almost like mirroring the structure here. Here's the good thing. Ask with faith. That single-mindedness. I only serve one God, right? In the end, is Abraham the father of pass off your wife as your sister twice and consider it. Whoever worships another God, even though his allegiance. That's what makes him the father of faith. Okay. Let the low and the rich in his humiliation the grass. Its flower falls and its beauty poots. So before I go on to the next section, anything grabbing your attention here? Clearly riffing on, I think it's Isaiah 40. Yeah. It's like, strawberries or berries. Verses 9 and 10, challenges that are facing the church in Jerusalem during James. Yeah. So here has a lot to say about not putting your trust in riches. Now we're going to look at trials. So we just had poverty. When he has stood the test, he will be tempted by God. When he is lured and enticed, is fully grown, brings forth. If you fall in with folly, you will. Where Proverbs goes to. So let's easier different ways. So God is not tempted, and God lead us not into temptation. The world. Could God Christianity? It's not like the evil and good are good stand and present to a modern audience with the forces, get it back in balance. No, that's not the way it works. This is not Christianity. Christianity and Judaism looks more like this. There's this world in rebellion against an all good God. Years ago, was it Kushner? Why do bad things? When bad things happen to good people? His conclusion he comes to is not a Jewish conclusion, even though he's a rabbi. That's not the way the Bible does it. God is not tempted, and this is going to be. I'm going to try to transliterate it. It can be translated in lots of ways. Trial. When Jesus teaches, when you pray, pray thusly. What is he just patient in the wilderness, right? Very, very clear in the intertestamental literature. Things like, is it the Book of Giants where this story is recounted? Anyway, where God can end evil anytime he wants, and we call that the second coming, or the glorious appearing, or what evil does then is end up tempt anyone. And this is what's in story. What's immediately before that is his baptism. So Jesus is baptized. The Spirit descends on him in the form of a dove, where Satan tempts him. So the Spirit is leading. So the prayer in the Lord's Prayer is, lead us not into temptation. Jesus is basically saying, pray that you reading of that temptation story, and the way I've never heard a pastor teach it any other way, is Jesus does right what we do wrong. Adam and all the other Adams since then have done wrong. So Jesus is saying, you don't want to go where I've gone. So ask God not to lead you there. When we face trials, no differences. Trial, God is not trialed by anything, right? Or let's say a rocket ship, put it to make sure it works. Reading this, they wouldn't have seen two different words there. What's he coming out of that? He's not fast.
As like a banner.
They've abandoned a distinctively Christian balance. Buddhism is the umbrella over there now. It's not really an active thing per se, a way of being Buddhist. Caleb and I obviously trained together to the Godhead. God is completely... Churches that have the God preached by Muhammad is not the God of the Bible. So they're not really... That's like kind of saying like, I don't like that. I'm just going to make the world the same direction, because we're not. We eternals. The interior life of, you've heard me mention his, and he ended up writing a book called his Catapult to Roman stuff. He was reading human rights. Yeah, there's a whole human rights. Yeah, there's a whole lot of countries that won't sign it. They don't want to be. Everyone can't be welcome in a space that Buddhist and Shinto and everything else years, but especially the first 300. The need, really, it always started with what so Christians can, it's not the same thing at all. Happy together is much more competitive than that. And it's a desire that it would be so, and we can all get along, but we don't all agree. So that's where you have this Christianity transform the world a la time here. If it's, yes, ourselves. It's our desire. Notice how he doesn't immediately go to Satan, right? You guys remember that old Flip Wilson routine? Oh, the devil made me do it. No, James won't put up with that either. I mean, that whole thing was to parody people claiming that they weren't each person lured and enticed by their own desire. Now that gives birth to sin, and then sin to death. Exactly what we saw Saint through our desire, right? It was beautiful and would make one wise, right? That's one prayer in our funeral liturgy. There's a lot of these. Now everybody wants to we want to have a celebration of life. A final commendation for the past, recognizing this person a sheep part, because they wouldn't be dead if they hadn't sinned. Now, this is the piece we're looking at again. For the proximal cause of death might have been cancer. The proximal cause of death might have been brittle diabetes, or old age, things just kind of between the spiritual world and the physical world. The physical world, whenever you say the Nicene Creed and say things seen and unseen,
The remark about old age was
since the 35-year difference when we have to,
to put some things together. I go into the only course I've taken, beginning 10, and it says God, nature,
Mhm.
and then it says man and modern approach. Okay, as an economy, man and nature, or maybe man versus nature, man versus man, or man and man.
Right.
And then I see a thing that says man in connection with the above two. That is, he's emerging.
And before you go on,
I don't want to.
all of those modern ways of thinking are Enlightenment categories, and that's part of why there's a friction with the Bible. But go ahead. Yeah.
Well, that's remarks on the history of anything to do with economics, and from that point on, you move into mathematics and so forth
Sure.
and so on, which is the way you look at it today versus it.
Right.
You can't help but do it.
Mhm.
Okay, wait a minute.
Absolutely, I'll be happy to. Yeah, I'll be happy
I
to.
would- I-
But there's going to be a natural friction from the standpoint of Scripture, but it's like without sin. It looks like, remember we were talking about alignment, that wisdom's about alignment. It looks like everything in harmony. That's the word you just used. So harmony with God, between individual and God, harmony with each other, harmony between the people and God. So it's all these. Sin is always understood as a deprivation or a distortion. It has no ontology is the word for this. This either mortal combat or a distortion of something that was made good. Resources. Not that I want, but that I need.
I would say that the famine, and that's all I'm covering in Genesis. This is a long-winded thing. I don't